Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much. I am Trisha Altman. I'm the Director of Programs and Engagement here at the Athenaeum. It is my pleasure to welcome you to our building and to Opera Philadelphia's Inside the Music series. The Athenaeum was founded in 1814. We are a member-supported circulating library, a research library, a community forum with lectures, discussion groups, concerts, film screenings, and exhibitions offered throughout the year. If you are not yet a member, but you enjoy literature, history, architecture, engaging conversation and community, or if you're just looking for a gorgeous place to work during the day, please consider joining us. And if you haven't already, please take a quiet peek into our reading room across the hall and into our exhibition space and member lounge downstairs. If you are already a member, thank you for being part of our community. And I hope that you will consider making a contribution to our annual fund so that we can continue to provide more programs just like this. The Athenaeum and Opera Philadelphia have a long-standing relationship, this being our 7th season of hosting their lectures here. We praise Opera Philadelphia for bringing new and innovative works to the Philadelphia stage and for lowering their ticket price to $11 or pay what you wish, making opera more accessible to more people and providing artists with newer and larger audiences. We are so proud to be one of your partners. And now, please silence your cell phones and join me in welcoming Dr. Lily Kass, Opera Philadelphia's Scholar in Residence.
Thank you for that kind introduction. I can speak for all of my colleagues at Opera Philadelphia that we're very honored to be partnered with you here at the Athenaeum as well. It's always such a pleasure to be in this gorgeous space and with such a friendly and curious audience. So thank you. I'm especially excited today to introduce you to The Seasons, a work that has been created as a labor of love through an intensive collaborative workshop process over the last couple of years. Operas are multimedia works of art, and there are many different elements involved. The Seasons in particular is interesting because it is a combination of old elements from the early 18th century and new elements from just this year. So I'll first introduce how The Seasons incorporates these old and new features, defining the musical theatrical genre of pastiche. I'll then give you a basic outline of the opera's plot before exploring one of the main building blocks of this opera, Antonio Vivaldi's The Four Seasons. We'll think about different ways music can relate to the weather before turning to one of the main themes of the opera. What purpose does art have in the changing world in which we live? Can art be activism? At the end, there will be time for you to ask questions, but if you need any clarifications along the way, or if there's something that goes wrong with the technology, God forbid, please feel free to pause me and let me know. Everyone hear me okay? Okay, speed of talking? Okay, perfect. So, what is The Seasons? The Seasons has music by Antonio Vivaldi, who is an Italian composer who lived from 1678 to 1741, and a text by an American poet and playwright, Sarah Rule, who was born about 300 years after Vivaldi was. Our very own General Director of Opera Philadelphia, Anthony Roth-Costanzo, co-conceived this piece with Sarah Rule in collaboration with choreographer Pan Tanowitz and director Zach Winokur. Anthony's production team, Scene, developed the piece alongside the American Modern Opera Company, and it was premiered less than a year ago at the Boston Lyric Opera. It is a multilingual work performed in English, Italian, and Latin with English supertitles. And I put all of this information on a single slide because my point is this is a lot. There are a lot of people who have worked on this piece. This isn't even to mention many of the artistic team and the cast, of course, and the Opera Philadelphia staff. But so many different elements are here from the past, from the present, even from the future, which is when the opera is set, that all come together to form a cohesive work, which is kind of magic, I think. This kind of musical and dramatic structure, in which disparate pieces are brought together into a new whole, is called a pastiche, or in Italian, pasticcio. The word pasticcio comes from the same root as the word pasta. Trying not to make you hungry, hopefully you've had lunch. Pasta means dough in Italian, and also pie. So it's the kind of pie that you make to use up all of the delicious leftovers in your fridge. You take a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and you mix it all together, put it in a crust, and you have a new meal that's hopefully very delicious. This is a method of composition that was very commonly used in 18th century opera construction, as it allowed creators to quickly create new works while keeping performers happily singing pieces of music they already knew, and also entertaining audiences with beloved classics. So it's a way to keep old music, so singers don't have to learn new things. It's a hard life being a singer, you have to learn a lot, so it's good to sometimes repeat performances. The audiences are like, oh, I recognize this from an opera I saw a few years ago, so there's some familiarity with the audience, but also there are new elements to it as well. Vivaldi himself participated in creating pasticcio operas during her career, so The Seasons was created in a spirit that would have been familiar to Vivaldi himself. This is a libretto from Vivaldi's opera Basaye, also known as Tamerlano, which contained music by Vivaldi, but also by his contemporaries. So you can even have pasticci that have music by multiple composers. The Seasons just has music by Vivaldi, so it's just a single composer, but works from across his career. The pasticcio aesthetic, going in the wrong direction here. The pasticcio aesthetic has also been recently used very effectively on Broadway with jukebox musicals, which contain pre-existing music by popular composer, a popular composer, or multiple composers pieced together into a new plot. So they've been massively popular. There are audience favorites such as Mamma Mia with music by ABBA, Moulin Rouge has music by a variety of composers. Beautiful is about Carole King and contains the music of Carole King. And Juliet is a retelling of Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet through the music of Max Martin, whose pop hits were made famous by such pop sensations as Britney Spears, the Backstreet Boys, and Katy Perry. And that's the kind of mixture of new and old that is kind of most similar to The Seasons, I think, where we have, a Shakespeare play written in the 17th century, and we have it reimagined for modern audiences with popular music that audiences will recognize. So we can keep the idea of jukebox musicals in our mind as we think about The Seasons and what kind of piece it is. The new plot that Sarah Rule constructed for The Seasons is firmly based in reality, but has some fantastical elements sprinkled in, a combination that is a hallmark of much of her writing. When I had the opportunity to speak to Sarah about The Seasons last week, she expressed that real life is sometimes difficult to believe. Sometimes things feel like a dream, and it's that dreamlike quality that permeates The Seasons, even as we in the audience recognize and relate to these characters. We could meet them in real life, but there's also a dreamlike quality to the action. The Seasons is set at a bucolic retreat for artists. These artist residencies and retreats do exist in the real world, even though they might sound like a fantasy or dream come true to many of us. The image on this slide comes from the website of the Artists Residency Alliance that allows you to search for a residency where you can do your art. Artists working in different media are invited to attend this fictional retreat in the seasons, where they will be given time and space to be creative and learn from one another in the midst of beautiful natural surroundings. The farmer, who used to be an actress, hosts the retreat, housing and feeding the poet, the painter, the performance artist, and the choreographer. Those are the names of the characters. They don't have specific names. So in a way, they are generalizable to people in this art form, but they also have very specific personality traits as well. Over the course of the retreat, the participants interact with one another in a variety of ways, with some even falling in love. At the same time, the nature that surrounds them, which is supposed to inspire their art, begins behaving in unexpected ways, with unsettling, unseasonable weather patterns. Another character, the cosmic weatherman, comments on these changes to the audience. So the cosmic weatherman often kind of breaks the fourth wall, talks directly to the audience, and says, like, alert, alert, this is an emergency, this kind of weather is not supposed to happen. So this is one of the fantastical elements in the opera, is this figure of the cosmic weatherman. We see the artists' lives increasingly impacted by these strange weather systems as they seek to navigate the disastrous effects of climate change. Dancers also help to tell this story, dramatizing the shifts in the weather, alongside creative, bubbling, scenic elements created from dish soap. And I'll talk about that more later. In the spring, in the plot, everything seems fine. It is the beginning of the retreat, and the poet and the painter fall in love. In the autumn, a weather system seems to be looming, and the seasons are already out of order, right? Autumn is not supposed to follow spring. But conditions are still good for romance, for the choreographer and the farmer. The poet and the painter argue, and the poet leaves for a walk. Suddenly, a blizzard begins. It's winter, all of a sudden, and the unprepared poet is frozen and knocked unconscious by the cold. The painter finds the poet and miraculously revives him, and all of the artists bond over their commitment to work together, even in the face of such extreme weather. However, even more extreme weather is to come. It feels like summer, and fires begin. The choreographer dies in one of these fires, but there is not much time to mourn as floods start soon after, knocking out the power. The performance artist, who had formerly been a political activist, has been working throughout her residency to build a boat out of garbage as a provocative art piece. The artists all end up using this boat practically to leave their no longer bucolic retreat, accompanied by the voices of a children's chorus, signifying the next generation who will have to navigate our imperfect world. Antonio Vivaldi, who composed all of the music you will hear in the seasons, lived from 1678 to 1741. He was a priest, a musician, and an educator who wrote many of his compositions for his students at an orphanage for girls in Venice, Italy. Vivaldi wrote many operas, but he didn't compose the seasons as an opera. Rather, the seasons, the opera, takes instrumental and vocal music that Vivaldi wrote for different purposes over the course of his career and puts them into the context of the brand new plot I just described. Vivaldi's most famous work, at least famous in modern times, is known as The Four Seasons. So how many of you recognize this tune? This is going to date me a bit, but this was my first cell phone ring in high school. It's also often heard on film soundtracks, in hotel lobbies, and as a kind of representative example of classical music. The Four Seasons is a group of 4 violin concertos that were originally published as part of a larger set called Il Cimento dell'Armonia e dell'Invenzione, or a contest between harmony and invention. Excerpts from these 4 famous concertos titled Spring, Summer, Fall, and Winter. Excerpts from these 4 famous concertos serve as a unifying thread throughout the seasons, signaling to the audience the unexpected changes in the weather that the characters are experiencing. A violin concerto is a genre of music that at Vivaldi's time strategically utilized contrasts to keep the audience's attention. It usually had 3 parts or movements, and in each movement there would be a musical conversation between the orchestra, which was mostly made up of string instruments at the time, and a solo instrument, in this case, a violin. Each of the 4 violin concertos in Vivaldi's The Four Seasons depicts a different time of year. In addition to the music, Vivaldi also wrote a sonnet or poem describing the natural scene he was depicting in each movement of the concertos, and he published this poem alongside each movement of the concerto. So you were meant to read the poem and think about the poem as you listened to the music. So imagining what the poem stated through listening to the music. So it's what we call programmatic music, music that has extra musical meaning. And the extra musical meaning is encompassed in this poetry. So I'll play you a couple of short examples, and I'm going to have to cut these off. But there are many, many recordings available of the Four Seasons. So if you're interested, you can listen to all 4 full violin concertos at your leisure. So this is the 3rd movement of Spring. And the poem Vivaldi wrote translates to the festive sound of pastoral bagpipes, dance nymphs and shepherds at spring's brilliant appearance. So we're going to listen to bagpipes and dancing, and also the sounds of spring, which for Vivaldi often include bird calls. So I'll try to point out a few of these things in the musical example. Here's what I hear as the bagpipes. And the birds. So hopefully you could hear a little bit of a taste of that. The movement is extremely dance-like, right? You can imagine people dancing, but then the Bagpipes, Vivaldi uses double stops on the violin, so the singer plays two strings at the same time, allowing there to be a drone like there is on the bagpipes with one of the strings, and then a melody on the other. So imitating the kind of technical function of the bagpipe, which is quite a different instrument than the violin, but using the violin, and then also imitating birdsong on the violin. Just so you have a little bit of contrast, I'll play you another example, which is from the slow movement of Winter. And the poem is to spend happy and quiet days near the fire while outside the rain soaks hundreds. Okay, so this one was slow, whereas the other one was fast. Could anyone hear the rain? How is Vivaldi depicting the rain? Does anyone have any? The pizzicato, right? So the strings are plucking strings, and we'll hear this in another example I have a little bit later. The strings are being plucked, which sounds like raindrops kind of hitting the ground or hitting roofs. It's making the violins kind of into percussion instruments of a sort. So there's still pitch, but there's a strong attack on each note that you couldn't achieve as well with a bowed string. So we have, in both of these movements, a contrast. Remember, contrasts are really important for Vivaldi and a lot of Baroque music. A contrast between the soloist and the orchestra. So in the movement 3 of Spring that I played for you first, it's in ritornello form, which means that the same melody comes back again and again, with the orchestra coming in between the soloist has little moments that contrast with the rest of things. So the soloist plays the bagpipes part, and then a main melody comes back. And it gives us in the audience a feeling of, oh, now we're home. I am familiar with this music. So we always know we're gonna come back to the familiar music. And that's the contrast between soloist and orchestra in that movement. This movement I just played is in variation form, theme and variation form. So the soloist is playing the main melody, the orchestra is accompanying, and it's almost like the orchestra is the outside and the violinist is the person inside listening to the rain. So we have almost a theatrical set being created by the music here and by the contrast between the soloist and the orchestra. We have the outside and the inside, and the soloist is playing the same melody multiple times, but varied in different ways. So there's continued interest, but the same feeling. If you stop to think about it, music about the weather is quite common. All over the world, there are indigenous musical traditions that are related to the weather, including various ceremonies to encourage rain for good harvests. So there are examples on this slide pictured for you in South Africa and Greece, but many others all over the world. In the context of American popular culture, the so-called Great American Songbook, collections of songs composed in the mid-20th century that had wide audience appeal, there are many, many songs about the weather as well. These are just a few, but you can think of Irving Berlin's Blue Skies, Harold Arlen and Ted Koehler's Stormy Weather, Roger and Hammerstein's Oh, What a Beautiful Morning, Harold Arlen and Yip Harburg's Somewhere Over the Rainbow. All of these talk about the weather, all of them focus on the weather and the effects of the weather on the people experiencing the weather. Vivaldi's Four Seasons, which we just heard excerpts of, as well as much of his vocal music, participates in this long-standing practice of depicting the weather using music. So besides the excerpts from the Four Seasons, most of the rest of the music in the opera The Seasons comes from operas Vivaldi wrote over the course of his career. Vivaldi wrote 22 operas that have survived through to today, and probably many more which we just don't know about yet, have not been discovered. They are very seldom produced today. I tried to look this up, and the information I found was I could only find 3 full productions of Vivaldi's operas scheduled for this season all over the world. That's in contrast to, hundreds by Mozart, etc. So Vivaldi's operas often sound old-fashioned to modern opera audiences, and that's part of why they're not performed. They were written for audiences who didn't necessarily sit down and listen intently for the length of the opera. Instead, audiences often came to the opera to talk to their friends, to gather gossip about society, and you can see the social function of opera in the architecture of theaters from the time in the background of this slide. You can see the seats are facing one another. So people came to the opera to be like, ooh, the Duke is here. Who's he with, right? And they didn't always tune into every note of every aria. They did, however, pay attention when singers started showing off. So there's a lot of vocal virtuosity in many of Vivaldi's operatic works, which is still thrilling for today's audiences to hear. And I would argue that with The Seasons, you have the best of both worlds because you have this amazing virtuosic music, but it's kind of like greatest hits, like things that we think audiences would like today. And then you also have a really compelling modern story that ties it all together, and we're meant to listen in, and there are many things for us to pay attention to, so we're not inclined to gossip with our neighbors quite as much. So I think it's a really smart idea to utilize Vivaldi's music in this way. Many of the arias that Vivaldi wrote are in what's called da capo form, and I want to explain this to you because it makes us listen in a different way, this form. Da capo form means there's one section of text and music, and then a contrasting section of text and music before we return to the first section of text and music. Da capo means from the head, from the top. The second time the first section returns, the singer often adds ornamentation, so showing off their unique vocal capabilities. And we'll hear this in practice with an aria that the poet sings in The Seasons, called Sento in seno che in pioggia di lagrime, which was originally from Vivaldi's 1724 opera Il Giustino. So I have here in this table, you see part A is the first section, and the literal English translation is, I feel in my chest that in a rain of tears, my heart's beloved is vanishing. Then we have the contrasting text, but my heart, neglect your crying, because your crying won't quell the pain. And then the singer will go back to the first text, I feel in my chest that in a rain of tears, my heart's beloved is vanishing. So da capo arias have this circular form, and you'll hear the same music as well as text each time the A section appears. So I have it here. You can follow along with the score if you read music to see. I'll also cue you when the B section starts. This is Natalie Stoltzman singing. We have the pizzicato raindrops again. That's the end of the first A section. We're getting kind of the orchestral play out of that now. And then we're going to hear the B section. That has a very short B section, so we're going back to A already, and you'll listen out for the singer ornamenting the vocal line, adding more notes than are written. Stop it there for the interest of time, but what's left is just the orchestra finishing, playing out the A section. So the way the music is printed, it saves paper. You just print A and then B and have a little sign that says go back to the beginning, da capo. And that means that the da capo section is exactly the same. It's the same page as you were singing the first time around. So the ornamentation is totally improvised. None of it is written down. So every singer you hear will sing it differently. Anthony Roth-Costanzo, our general director, will be singing this aria in our performance. I haven't spoken to him about whether he plans to ornament differently every night, but I wouldn't be surprised. That's something that happens. And Anthony is so creative that I imagine new ornaments will just bubble out of him. So that's the way a da capo aria works. So you can see how you can kind of tune out a little bit, because we're always going to come back to the same words and the same music, but then we hear the singer ornamenting and we're like, oh, okay, now it's time to pay attention. So here is the new English language text that Sarah Rule composed for this aria. We can see that it takes the Italian as its starting point and expands it from there. Vivaldi arias often look to the weather as an analogy for internal feelings, and Sarah's new text refers to both the internal and external manifestations of the weather. So it's crying inside my heart, I need an umbrella, it's raining, right? So Sarah and her collaborators on the seasons made this unique decision to create this translation or adaptation, if you will, of the text into English, while also keeping some of the original Italian intact. Sarah described this to me as a sort of zoom in, zoom out effect. We can listen to the Italian and appreciate the beauty of the sound, the voice, the vowel sounds, the piece as it was originally written. And we also have the opportunity to have the language barrier removed and to feel more immediately how the character feels through the English text. So there's no recording of this in the new version, so I'm going to just sing you a little bit of it so you can hear how it sounds in English, switching to Italian and back. In my soul it's raining, raining, raining tears, an umbrella, an umbrella inside my heart. And then it switches to Italian. Sento in seno che in pioggia di lagrime, sento in seno che in pioggia di lagrime si dilegua l'amanto mio cor, si dilegua l'amanto mio cor. And then the B section is back in English. But the tears cannot wash the pain away, wash all of the pain away. So stop crying, crying sky. So stop crying, crying sky. And then it would go back to the beginning. Thank you. Thank you. So I just wanted to demonstrate to you how the English works, especially since the text is really important for several features of the aria and da capo arias like these. First of all, there's the affect, right? So the affect means mood, and these are moods that Descartes wrote about in the Passions of the Soul from 1649 that composers would have been thinking about in the 18th century. Wonder, love, hatred, desire, joy, sadness, and all of the kind of gradations in between. What do we think the affect of that aria is? If you had to choose one of these. Desire? Yeah, desire for the vanishing beloved. And sadness. Yeah, it's kind of a combination of the two. There's one more musical element that's prevalent in Vivaldi's musical writing and that I think we can hear better when we hear it in English, which is why I just sang that to you. Vivaldi and his contemporaries built on the compositional practices of composers like Claudio Monteverdi, who wrote a century earlier, who sought to demonstrate the meaning of particular words of the text through their musical setting. This is called word painting. It's also called madrigalisms. And a good example for the holiday season is from Handel's Messiah. The tenor aria Every Valley contains a lot of word painting, including this one, which I like because you can see it in the music. Even if you can't read music, you see crooked goes up, down, and straight just stays the same. So it sounds like the crooked straight, right? So crooked is crooked, straight is straight. So that's a prime example of word painting. So in the aria I just sang to you, there was a long melismatic passage on the word crying. That kind of sounded like crying. Cry. Right, I didn't sing it quite like that, but you could play it up like that. It's the word crying is supposed to sound like crying. You'll hear word painting all over the place. That's one of the reasons why I'm really glad some of the text is in English, so you can have that immediacy of understanding the word painting. So I mentioned earlier that one of the main themes of this opera is climate change, and another is how art can intervene. In other words, is art about creating beauty in a bubble, like an artist's retreat? Or is it about responding to world events? Or is it both? Vivaldi knew nothing about climate change or global warming, but The Seasons is not the first time his Four Seasons concertos have been used in the service of climate activism. There's a piece called The Uncertain Four Seasons, which was created by adapting Vivaldi's score using climate change data. So using computer algorithms, Vivaldi's score was modified in 2021 based on climate change data. And there are different versions of it for different locations because the effects of climate change are not consistent across all geographical regions. So in some locations, the birds that we hear in spring go silent, which is very powerful. So there's a little trailer for this that I'll play for you now so you can get a little feeling of what the piece is about. If you know the piece, like some of the melodies have been changed into minor modes, and it's a creepy post-apocalyptic horror type feeling that makes you feel at least makes me feel very anxious. But I think it's very effective. And again, you can listen to this full piece in many different versions, including a version from Venice, which is where Vivaldi lived, to understand what the piece is doing. In an essay prefacing this piece, Damien Gameau writes, "Climate change and all of our ecological dilemmas are not scientific problems. They are human problems. It's easy to forget that we humans are a keystone species, and keystone species are capable of regenerating and defining entire ecosystems. If you listen carefully, there is a new song emerging. A new concerto is being written by a growing community that believes we can once again inhabit a world that Vivaldi so beautifully articulated 300 years ago, but we all have a note to play." The same idea that art can respond to issues like climate change permeates various pieces of climate activism in Philadelphia in recent years. There's a mural, Climate Justice in Lenape-Hoking in the Norris Square area of Philadelphia, for example. Its lead artist, Uri Jones, when asked what she was hoping to achieve with the mural, said, and I quote, "Art alone cannot solve the climate crisis. However, we believe through storytelling and representation, we can inspire people of all ages to analyze the connections between land, air, trash, and climate, and to examine how their own choices and actions are influenced by history and shape the present and the future." In addition, the Penn program in environmental humanities has been involving community members in the region and beyond in writing their own climate stories, encouraging people of all ages to think through their experience of climate change and express it through various artistic means. So what interventions does The Seasons make? I would argue that it does the same thing as these other works of art, inspiring audiences to think about these real-world issues in creative ways. Sarah Ruhl has acknowledged that it's hard to talk about these issues. They are scary, and reading about them in a newspaper, for example, doesn't make us feel very good. Experiencing these same ideas through art can make them more palatable, while also having a greater emotional impact. These ideas might also have greater staying power in our minds if they are tied to bite-sized pieces of poetry, creative scenic effects, and catchy music. In addition to these larger philosophical impacts, Sarah Rule has specified in her libretto, and I quote, "Given the subject matter, the set/costumes should be made with minimal environmental impact." Theater has recently been proven to have a substantial environmental impact, with lots of sets and costumes being scrapped rather than recycled once performances are done. New materials are being used instead of recycled ones. Large amounts of energy are required for things like the transport of artists to various locations, as well as the upkeep of theaters with elaborate lighting and sound systems. Many groups are currently working to address these issues, including the Broadway Green Alliance, and new guides are emerging that instruct theaters in how to create art more sustainably. For the seasons, the creative team, including the innovative set designer Mimi Lien, thought through how to apply these methods. We have dancers choreographed by Tam Tanowitz using their bodies to, quote, dance the weather, taking up one of the core recommendations of the Sustainable Production Toolkit, which is to spend money on people, not stuff. So the set design for the seasons is minimalistic, but the dancers use their bodies to conjure various effects and emotions. So we have kind of human scenery. It's more than scenery, but we have human kinetic effects contributing to the visual impact of every scene. In addition, the creative team for the seasons decided to collaborate with Jack Foreman, a graduate student based at the MIT Media Lab, to figure out how to conjure the weather on stage with minimal environmental impact. They came up with bubbles made of dish soap. I can show you a few brief informal experiments in our scene shop from a month or two ago that demonstrate the different amazing things these bubbles can do. So we have mountains of bubbles. And they can create effects like the snow is going up rather than down. So this is used for winter on our set. And if it looks this good in the scene shop, imagine how it will look on stage. We have bubbles, this is Jack Foreman himself. We have bubbles filled with fog. So they're created and fog is blown into them, and then they close, and they can float across the stage, which is very cool. And we also have, again, we're back to pasta, but this is kind of like a pasta extruder, but for bubbles. So we can have these kind of strings of bubbles growing like this. So we'll have these special effects and many more. Again, it's just regular bubble detergent powder that is being used to create these effects. They won't have a long-lasting environmental impact. There's nothing that we'll need to, throw away afterwards. Nothing will be filling up the landfill. And so that is how they are interpreting Sarah Rule's directive. In closing, seeing these bubble effects, which have minimal environmental impact but maximal dramatic impact, makes me think of an idea which Vivaldi would have been very familiar. This is the ethos of meraviglia, which translates directly to the marvelous. Prevalent in the Baroque era, this ethos of meraviglia was connected with ideas of audience surprise, amazement, and wonder. The scenic design in the 17th and 18th century evoked meraviglia through a variety of stage illusions, including complex works of perspective through backdrops and scenic flats. These, if you believe it, are from the 17th century. 18th century, and highly technical theater machinery, which allowed scenic effects such as Greek gods descending from above in chariots of clouds. So I think if Vivaldi had been able to make growing mountains of snow using bubbles of dish soap, he would have been happy to do so in his scenic design. And I'll end there. Thank you for listening, and I'm happy to take any questions. For questions, we have a microphone that my colleague Claire has, and she can go around. The microphone, I'm told, will not amplify the sound in the space. It's for video. So I will rephrase all of the questions when I hear them in case you can't hear them. The microphone is for the video.
Thank you for the great talk. There are two countertenors or three and a mezzo-soprano or a mezzo-soprano. What's in this piece? Do we have three countertenors or?
Yes, the question is how we cast the characters, because Sarah Rule said she didn't really care about the genders of the characters as long as they could sing the music. She was happy with anybody singing the roles. So in our production, we have the poet is sung by a countertenor, Anthony Roth Costanzo. We have the painter is another countertenor, and then the choreographer is sung by a mezzo-soprano. It could be a countertenor, but it's really hard to get three countertenors together in the same place. They're very few and far between. So the choreographer is sung by a female mezzo-soprano in our production.
My other question is, does the score have the complete 4 seasons plus other stuff, or pieces of it?
Yes. Does the score have the complete 4 seasons plus other stuff? No, it just has excerpts from the 4 seasons. So the 2 examples I played are part of the score of the season, so that you'll have music you can recognize there. There are also excerpts from autumn and summer, but just short excerpts. There's also a little bit from Vivaldi's Mandolin Concerto, but only like 2 minutes of it or something like that. And then the other pieces are vocal music from Vivaldi's operas and 2 sacred pieces from Vivaldi's kind of sacred choral and solo works.
How are the dancers integrated, and to what degree do the dancers kind of magnify that madrigalism kind of thing? You know, like I think of madrigals, and I know that they are painting words while they're standing there singing, you know, mostly a cappella. So do the dancers do the same thing? Or, yeah.
Yeah, so I'll answer this question as best as I can. The question is, how are the dancers integrated, and are they kind of illustrating the music in the same way that madrigalism or word painting does with vocal music? I saw the archival recording from Boston Lyric Opera, so I can speak to that. I am told that things are changing in rehearsal, which is really exciting, but I haven't seen our version yet. So I'll kind of give you broad strokes, but I can't give you details because it's a work in progress, which is really great. So the dancers are integrated. It's not just like everyone else goes away and then there are dancers. A lot of the times the dancers are dancing are during these excerpts from the 4 seasons, and the libretto says the dancers dance the weather. So they're meant to kind of represent these weather systems in certain ways. So oftentimes during the instrumental music, but they also interact with the singers while the singers are singing. There are kind of transitions where they're built in. There will also be, and this is new for Philadelphia, there will be a flautist, a flute player on stage who will not be dancing, but she will be playing the flute on stage and is kind of another body on stage. There's no text for her. As far as I've seen, there's no text that kind of refers to her, but she's another kind of symbolic figure on stage. So yeah, the dancers are very much integrated. Everyone's rehearsing all together. Like if you look at the rehearsal schedule, the singers are there at the same time as the dancers, because this is meant to be a very cohesive and collaborative work. Yes?
Can you tell us a little more about Sarah Rule?
Yes, I can tell you more about Sarah Rule and what she has done. So I actually had the great pleasure of interviewing Sarah, a very brief interview last week that will be linked to our website shortly in our Between the Notes lecture for donors. So we have an interview with her. I've taken some excerpts of it and incorporated it into my talk today with her thoughts on various things, but it's great to hear it straight from her. In terms of her previous experience, she's a well-known playwright. She's a professor at Yale University, and she has also written a lot of poetry. And some of her poetry will be projected onto the stage as if the character of the poet has written it, but it's actual poetry that Sarah Rule wrote during the pandemic, looking out her window and noticing the seasons changing. So her personal poetry is kind of incorporated into this opera, not just in the text that the singers are singing, but also in this projected text on stage. She has written works of theater kind of without music, but even those works are quite musical, and she indicates music in different ways. The writing is very lyrical as well. And she collaborated with the composer Matthew O'Coin on the opera Eurydice, which was at the Metropolitan Opera at LA Opera, and it has since been kind of condensed to a chamber work as well, so it can be performed at many different opera companies now. It's a retelling of the Orpheus and Eurydice work from Eurydice's point of view, more of Eurydice's perspective, and Sarah wrote it as a play, and then Matt O'Coin asked to collaborate with her to make it into an opera, and that's really how she got into opera. She was introduced to Anthony Roth Costanzo through that project because he sang one of the roles in an early iteration of that opera, and she started working with him soon after on this project. So she's very excited about opera, and she calls herself an opera novice, although it doesn't seem that way to me.
When is the performance and where do you practice?
Great question. The performance will be opening on Friday. So our dress rehearsal is on Wednesday. We have performances Friday, Saturday, Sunday. I'm looking at our marketing person to make sure I'm getting it right. Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, so it's just one weekend. And we are rehearsing this time around at the Philadelphia Theater Company. We're using their space and a few other locations for like the dancers to be able to warm up before rehearsals and things like that. But we're lucky to collaborate with a lot of great area theater spaces for our rehearsal space. The performances will be in the Perlman Theater at the Kimmel Center, so a smaller theater than we use for many of our bigger works, and because there are so few seats, it's sold out. So that's the story of the performance. I think I need to officially stop now for the interests of time because it's exactly 2 p.m. But I will stick around in case anyone has any other questions. I also want to direct you to the corner of the room over there. We have flyers about the seasons and also our remaining operas in our opera season, and various other information. I'm sure the Athenaeum has information as well if you'd like to become a member. So please see what else we're doing, and I hope you'll join us again. Thanks so much.